What if I told you the most expensive lure in your tackle box, the one you spent $100 on, is being ruined by the one thing you can't leave at home, your own two hands? Sounds crazy, right? We spend all this time worrying about line visibility, lure color, and matching the hatch. But the problem might be far simpler, far more fundamental. In this video, we are going to explore a theory that might just explain why you're going home empty-handed time and time again. It's the idea that the simple, unavoidable heat from your body is the ultimate reason fish are refusing your bait. Stay with me, because the logic behind this is surprisingly solid, and it could completely change how you fish. So before we get into it, I have to ask, do you honestly believe the warmth of your hands can spook a fish? Go ahead and drop a comment right now. Let me know if you think I'm crazy. I'm really curious to see who the believers and skeptics are before we dive in. For years, we've been conditioned as anglers to focus on one thing above all else when it comes to handling bait: scent. We buy special soaps to wash our hands, we use sprays to mask human odor, and we douse our lures in fish attractants. The entire industry is built around the idea that our smell is the enemy, and it is a factor, no doubt about it. But in our obsession with scent, we've completely overlooked a signal that's arguably even more powerful and unnatural to a fish: temperature. Think about all the little habits we have. You pick up a soft plastic craw, and you kind of roll it between your fingers to make it more pliable. Or you grab a handful of night crawlers and they're writhing around in your warm palm as you get ready to rig one up. We do these things without a second thought, believing we're prepping the bait. But what we're actually doing is conducting a science experiment we don't even realize is happening. We are transferring thermal energy, creating a bait that feels completely alien in the fish's world. And that's the habit, the blind spot, that we're going to expose today. Let's start with the hard numbers, the undeniable physics of the situation. Your body temperature hovers around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now think about the water you're fishing. On a good day for bass fishing in the spring, that water might be 55 or 60 degrees. If you're trout fishing in a mountain stream, it could be in the 40s. That's a temperature difference of 40, maybe even 50 degrees. When you hold a lure or a piece of bait in your hand for just 5 or 10 seconds, you are rapidly changing its temperature. It's like taking a small object out of a refrigerator and holding it in your warm hands. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of a cool lake on an early morning. The air is crisp, the water is still. You rig up your soft plastic stick bait, spending a good 30 seconds making sure it's perfectly straight on the hook, all while it soaks up heat from your fingertips. You've just turned that perfectly natural-looking bait into a tiny, silent, heat-emitting beacon. Now let's transition from our perspective to the fish's. A fish experiences its world in a way that is hard for us to comprehend. They have an incredible sensory organ that we lack, called the lateral line. Picture it as a series of receptors running down the length of their body. This system is so sensitive it can detect the faintest vibrations and pressure changes in the water. It's how they find prey, avoid predators, and navigate in total darkness, but it also helps them detect subtle changes in water temperature and currents. For a fish, a sudden, localized warm spot in their environment is not a normal occurrence. It's an anomaly. It doesn't feel like a crawfish, a minnow, or an insect. All of those creatures have bodies that are the exact same temperature as the surrounding water. They are in thermal equilibrium. Your bait, after being in your hand, is not. It's an outlier. Think of it like a single, out-of-tune instrument in an otherwise perfect orchestra. It just sounds wrong, and for a fish, it feels wrong. So what signal are we actually sending? To a predator that has survived for millions of years based on instinct, anything unnatural is a potential threat. A small, warm object descending through the water column doesn't compute as food. Food is cold-blooded. Food is part of the environment. A warm object feels like it's been touched by a warm-blooded creature. And in the natural world, what are the big, warm-blooded things that interact with the water? Otters, birds, raccoons, and humans. All of them are predators. So when a bass or a walleye approaches your bait and its ultra-sensitive face and lateral line detect this little pocket of warm water around it, an alarm bell goes off. It's a subconscious, instinctual red flag that screams danger or trap. It's not a dinner bell. Imagine you're walking in the woods and you see a perfectly ripe apple sitting on a tree stump, but it's glowing faintly. You wouldn't eat it, would you? Your brain would tell you something is wrong. That's what a warm bait is to a fish. Let's consider how this applies differently to various types of bait. For live bait, like worms or minnows, this is especially critical. A nightcrawler is a simple creature. Its body is 100% at the ambient temperature of the soil or water it's in. When you hold it in your palm, its little body heats up incredibly fast. You then toss it into cooler water, and it's essentially a wiggling little hot dog. A fish that's used to slurping up cool, natural worms will immediately sense the difference. The same goes for minnows. That minnow you've had in your hand while hooking it is now swimming around with a completely unnatural thermal signature, telling every predator in the area that it's been handled by something big and warm. This might be why a minnow under a bobber that's been sitting for a while, after its body temperature has reacclimated to the water, often gets hit, while a freshly hooked and casted one gets ignored. It's not just about the minnow calming down, it's about it becoming thermally invisible again. Now you might think this doesn't apply as much to artificial lures, but you'd be wrong. Soft plastics are particularly susceptible. They are designed to absorb and hold temperature. Think about a dense, salt-impregnated stick bait or a creature bait. When you handle it, that plastic acts like a little sponge for your body heat. Hard baits like crankbaits or jerkbaits are less of an issue, since we tend to handle them by the hooks or the bill, and their material doesn't transfer heat as efficiently. But any lure you're touching with the meat of your fingers or palm is a candidate for thermal contamination. Imagine you're dragging a Texas-rigged worm across the bottom. A bass comes to investigate. It gets close, and instead of feeling the cool, neutral temperature of a real worm or the surrounding mud, it feels this faint aura of warmth. That's enough to make a wary, pressured fish turn away at the last second. It's the explanation for so many of those frustrating bumps that never turn into a full commitment. Let's talk about how heat amplifies the scent problem we're all so worried about. Scent is essentially a cloud of molecules that an animal detects. When you add heat to almost any substance, you increase the rate at which its molecules move and disperse. It's basic chemistry. So when you warm up a lure or bait with your hands, you're not just adding a thermal signature, you're also making your human scent, the oils, the sweat, the residue from the gas station coffee you just drank, more volatile. You're essentially turning your bait into a more potent, human-scented air freshener. It's a double whammy. The fish is first alerted by the unnatural temperature, and then as it gets closer, it gets a supercharged blast of human scent. This combination is a powerful repellent. We think we're helping by warming up a bait to make it release its own attractant scent, but in reality we're likely just making our own scent 100 times more detectable. The situation gets even more critical when you're fishing in cold water. Let's paint a picture. It's late fall or maybe early spring. The water temperature is a frigid 42 degrees. The fish are lethargic, their metabolism has slowed way down, and they are not aggressive. They're not going to chase anything. They inspect their food very carefully before committing. In this environment, the temperature difference between your hand and the water is at its absolute maximum. A bait that's even a few degrees warmer than the surrounding water will stand out like a searchlight in the dark. A lethargic bass or trout that might be willing to gently suck in a perfectly presented temperature-neutral bait will absolutely refuse one that feels weird and warm. This is where the hot hands theory goes from being a minor factor to potentially the #1 reason you are getting skunked. In cold water, everything is amplified, and fish are far less forgiving of an unnatural presentation. Think about ice fishing for a moment. It's the ultimate example of this principle in action. The water under the ice is just above freezing, maybe 33 or 34 degrees. Your hands are 98 degrees. You're often rebaiting a tiny jig with a wax worm or a minnow head in a warm shelter or with your bare hands. Then you drop that bait back down into that frigid water. The thermal shock is immense. The little bait is glowing with heat in a world of absolute cold. Perch, crappie, and walleye will come right up to that jig, stare at it on the fish finder, and then just fade away. We blame the color, we blame the jigging action, but it could very well be that the bait is screaming unnatural at them through its temperature. This is a perfect illustration of how that huge temperature delta can be a deal breaker for finicky fish. It's a variable that almost no one considers when they're trying to figure out a tough bite on the ice. Let's imagine a simple experiment you could try yourself, just as a thought exercise. Suppose you had a high-tech thermal camera, one that can see heat. You take 2 identical soft plastic worms from the same bag. One you pick up carefully with a pair of forceps, only touching the very tip, and you hook it. The other you hold in your hand for 20 seconds, rolling it around, just like many people do. Now, if you were to look at those 2 baits through the thermal camera, one would be the same color as the background, totally camouflaged in the thermal spectrum. The other would be glowing brightly. Now, drop them both in a tank of cool water. The first one disappears thermally. The second one leaves a faint trail of warm water as it sinks and continues to glow for a surprisingly long time. Which one do you think a wary, instinct-driven predator is going to eat? The one that looks and feels like everything else in its environment, or the one that is setting off all kinds of unnatural sensory alarms? This brings us to a common myth that needs to be busted. You'll hear old-timers say, "You got to warm up the worm, get the scent flowing." They believe that by handling the bait, they are activating the impregnated scents and oils, making it more attractive to fish. While there might be a tiny kernel of truth in that, heat does make scent more volatile. We've already discussed how this is a double-edged sword that amplifies your own scent. The fundamental flaw in this logic is that it completely ignores the much larger, more negative impact of the unnatural temperature itself. The potential benefit of releasing a little more garlic scent is massively outweighed by the terrifying, unnatural signal of a warm object in a cool world. It's like trying to sneak up on a deer while wearing a squeaky pair of shoes but whispering to be quiet. You've solved one tiny problem while creating a much, much bigger one. The fish's sense of touch and temperature is just as important as its sense of smell. So, how do we solve this problem? It's actually surprisingly simple, but it requires breaking some lifelong habits. The first and most obvious solution is to minimize contact. Use tools. A good pair of forceps or hemostats is your new best friend. Use them to pick your soft plastics out of the bag. Use them to hold the bait while you rig it. The goal is to touch the bait with your warm skin as little as possible. If you're using live bait like worms, use a worm threader or just grab them with the forceps. It might feel clumsy and slow at first, like you're performing surgery on your bait. But the extra few seconds it takes to rig up this way could be the difference between getting a bite on that cast or not. It's about being deliberate and conscious of every moment you make contact with your offering. Another practical tip is to cool your hands down before handling bait, especially on those cold days. This is easy to do. Just dip your hands in the lake or river for 10 or 15 seconds before you reach into your bait bag. This will bring your skin temperature down significantly closer to the ambient water temperature. It won't make your hands as cold as the water, of course, but it will dramatically reduce the amount of heat you transfer to the bait during that brief handling time. Think of it as a reset. You're about to present something to the fish, so you want to make yourself, and by extension your bait, as much a part of that fish's environment as possible. It's the same reason we try to stay quiet on the bank or in the boat. We're trying to reduce our unnatural impact on the fish's world. This is just applying that same logic to a different sense. Wearing gloves is another option, but it's not a perfect solution. While thin nitrile or latex gloves can provide a barrier for your scent, they don't do much to block heat transfer. Your body heat will pass right through them. Thicker, insulated gloves might block the heat, but they make it nearly impossible to tie knots or feel what you're doing. Perhaps the best approach is a combination. Use a thin glove on one hand for general tasks and use forceps with your bare, recently cooled hand for the delicate work of rigging the bait. The key takeaway here isn't that you need to buy a bunch of new gear. It's that you need to change your mindset. Start thinking about your thermal signature as being just as important as your scent signature. It's a shift in philosophy. Let's walk through a common fishing scenario to see how this plays out. Imagine you're wading a trout stream. You've been casting a spinner with no luck. You decide to switch to a more subtle presentation, a single salmon egg on a small hook. The old habit is to pinch an egg between your thumb and forefinger, maybe roll it a bit, and carefully slide it onto the hook. That egg has now absorbed a ton of heat. You drift it through a promising run. A big brown trout sees it, moves to intercept, but as it gets close, it feels that tiny pocket of warm water. It senses something is off, and it shies away. Now let's replay that. This time you dip your hands in the 45-degree stream first. Then you use your cold fingertips to quickly and delicately hook the egg. You've transferred minimal heat. You make the exact same drift. The trout sees the egg, approaches, and this time everything feels right. It's the right size, the right color, and, crucially, the right temperature. The fish inhales it without hesitation. This principle might even explain why some lures seem to work better after they've soaked for a bit. Have you ever been fishing a jerkbait? You cast it out, and the first few twitches get no response. And then you let it sit for a long pause, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and on the very next twitch, bam, you get a violent strike. We often assume the fish just needed time to find it, or that the long pause was the trigger. But what if it's also about thermal acclimation? That bait, which you handled while tying it on, has now had enough time to cool down and reach the same temperature as the surrounding water. It has become thermally neutral. On that next twitch, it looks, acts, and now feels like a natural bait fish. It's another piece of the puzzle that just seems to fit perfectly with this hot hands theory. It's not just one thing, it's a collection of these little observations from the water that start to make a compelling case. Now, I know there are going to be skeptics. People will say, well, I've been fishing for 50 years, holding worms in my hand the whole time, and I catch plenty of fish. And that's absolutely true. Like, this isn't to say you can never catch a fish if you touch your bait. Aggressive, feeding fish will often overlook minor flaws in a presentation. If a school of bass is in a feeding frenzy, you could probably throw a bare, hot hook in there and get bit. But we're not talking about those easy days. We're talking about the tough days. We're talking about pressured fish. We're talking about neutral or negative fish that are inspecting every little detail before they decide to eat. On those days, the margins are razor thin, and A small, unnatural detail like temperature can be the deciding factor. This is about turning a one-fish day into a five-fish day. It's about getting that one extra bite that makes the whole trip worthwhile. Let's apply this to a very specific and often frustrating situation: sight fishing for bedded bass. There is nothing more maddening than seeing a giant bass sitting on a bed, knowing she's there, and throwing everything in your tackle box at her with no result. You'll see her nose down on your bait, look at it, and then just turn away. We chalk it up to her being finicky or not in the mood to eat. But think about it from a thermal perspective. That bass is on high alert, protecting her nest. She is incredibly sensitive to anything that seems out of place or threatening. You repeatedly cast a soft plastic lizard, which you've been handling, into her home. She sees this object that is visibly glowing with heat compared to the cool water and sand around her. It's the ultimate intruder. It's not just a lure, it's a warm, unnatural invader. No wonder she won't bite it. By ensuring your bait is thermally neutral, you present an object that is far less threatening and far more likely to be seen as a simple nuisance to be moved, which is often the bite you're looking for. This concept also forces us to rethink the very nature of attractants. We buy gels and sprays that are designed to taste and smell like crawfish or shad, and they work. But many of them are petroleum-based or have other properties that can insulate a lure, causing it to hold our body heat for even longer. It's a paradox. The very thing we're adding to make the bait more appealing from a scent perspective might be making it less appealing from a thermal perspective. This doesn't mean we should stop using them, but it does mean we should be more careful about how we apply them, perhaps applying the scent with a cotton swab or while wearing gloves, and then letting the lure sit on the deck of the boat for a minute to cool down before casting is the smarter play. It's about being holistic in our approach, considering all the sensory information we're giving the fish, not just the scent. The final psychological shift here is to stop thinking about your bait as an inanimate object you are simply throwing into the water. Instead, start thinking of it as a messenger, and you have to decide what message it's going to carry. Is it going to carry the message of a natural, unsuspecting meal that belongs in this environment? Or is it going to carry the message of a strange, warm, human-scented object that signals danger? Every time you touch it, you are changing the message. This requires a level of mindfulness that many of us, myself included, often lack when we're just excited to get a line in the water. It's about slowing down, being deliberate, and respecting the incredible sensory abilities of the fish we're trying to catch. It's a deeper level of the sport, moving beyond just casting and retrieving into the realm of true, subtle presentation. Ultimately, what this all boils down to is a simple question of control. As anglers, we are obsessed with controlling variables. We control our casting accuracy, our retrieve speed, our depth, our lure color, our line size. We try to control everything we possibly can to increase our odds, and yet most of us have completely ignored this massive, significant variable, the temperature of our bait. It's a blind spot. Acknowledging the hot hands theory and adjusting your habits accordingly is simply adding one more controllable variable to your arsenal. It might not be the magic bullet on every single trip, but over the course of a season, paying attention to your thermal signature will, without a doubt, result in more bites from wary, pressured, or finicky fish. It's one more piece of the puzzle, and in a sport of inches and ounces, it's a piece that's too important to ignore any longer. So let's wrap this all up. We've talked about the massive temperature difference between our bodies and the water. We've discussed how a fish's super-sensitive lateral line can easily detect this unnatural warmth as a danger signal, and we've seen how this effect is magnified in cold water and how it can be the deal breaker for finicky fish. The biggest aha moment for me, the real turning point, was realizing that we have been so laser focused on what a fish can smell that we completely forgot about what it can feel. A bait that is 40 degrees warmer than its environment is like a flashing neon sign that says, "I do not belong here," and that, my friends, can change everything. This isn't just another minor tip, it's a fundamental shift in how you should think about presenting your bait. It could be the one hidden variable that has been silently sabotaging your efforts for years. Thank you so much for watching and for keeping an open mind about this. If this video gave you a new perspective, do me a favor and hit that like button. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on more tips that challenge the conventional wisdom. Now for the big question. Now that you've heard all the evidence, what is the one bait you handle the most that you are going to change your technique with starting on your very next trip? Is it your soft plastics? Your live bait? Let's get a discussion going in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.